Bees are critical to the agricultural industry. They are responsible for pollinating 3/4 of the world's crops every year. Neonicotinoids, or neonics, are a chemical applied to crops mainly through seed treatments and have been linked with harming bee populations through memory damage and declining queen bee numbers. Neonics are a very effective insect controlling chemical, but they are not selective with what insects they harm. Both friendly and harmful insects are affected negatively through the application of neonics on crops. With declining bee populations, crop pollination is not occurring at the same levels. This leads to decreased yields and lower crop production. By banning neonics, it would be the first step to recovering these populations and towards a more sustainable agricultural industry.
Good morning, jury, moderator, and fellow debaters. I'm Reagan.
I'm Tanner.
This is Tanner. We shall be speaking against the motion of banning the use of neonics in agriculture, gardening, and landscape use for the following reasons. Scientific research has yet to prove that neonics have a direct mortality on bees. This means that through all the research, scientists cannot prove that directly ingesting neonics kills bees. Secondly, available science and research suggests that falling bee numbers are due to a multitude of factors, such as reduced habitat and food sources, diseases, and even pests. Again, there's no concrete evidence that banning neonics will have any effect on bee populations. And last, there is no viable and safe alternative to neonics. Without these pesticides, farmers would have to spray as much as 2.7 times more passes with far more toxic chemicals to reach desired effect as one seed treatment with neonics.
How neonics work. Neonics are designed to kill insects through their ingestion of the chemical. The plants take up the chemical through the roots and it travels through the plant. This means that for the chemical to be effective, the insect must ingest the chemical in some way. Once the neonic chemical is brought into the system, it begins to harm the insect.
A meta-analysis by James Cosmo showed that neonics have no direct mortality on bees. This means that ingesting traces of this chemical is not poisoning the bees. So if there's no direct to the bees, why are these neonics being blamed for the killing?
Bees can...
They get there.
You say that your evidence proves that neonics are the main cause to the decline in bee health, when there are many other factors that could be causing this, that include parasites, pathogens, disease, habitat loss, and food supply. Why aren't these factors being looked at more in depth instead of just blaming neonics for harming bees?
So it's true that neonics are not the single cause of declining bee populations. Other factors do come into play when we look at why the numbers of bees are declining. But neonics, they are a contributing factor, and they do cause damage to the bees. When the bees take the chemical into their body, it starts to affect their internal systems, and depending on the dosage, it slowly impacts them, can make them infertile, or can either kill the insect altogether. So seeing that they are a contributing factor to the elimination of bees, does it not make sense to eliminate neonics as one of the steps moving towards saving the valuable bee population?
Personally, the agriculture industry is too important to just start testing and experimenting on. If one chemical like this is banned, then many more will come forward being banned. The agriculture industry is too important to blindly experiment on to figure out a small issue like neonicotinoids when there's not enough evidence that they're directly causing harm to bees.
We have found evidence that proves that since the neonics ban in the European Union, that EU farmers need to use up to 2.7 more foliar applications of the chemical pyrethroids. These chemicals are scientifically proven to be more directly toxic to bees than neonics. Their primary dispersal is foliar applications, and this gives bees a greater chance to come in contact with this chemical. If the ban is to continue, what is your alternative to neonics?
Well, if we're talking about Europe, a study in Europe has found that any outdoor use of neonics, any use of the chemical causes harmful effects on bees. The pesticide accumulates in the water and soil, and it can impact future crops that are put on the land. Even the weeds and wildflowers intake the chemical and harm insects that feed on them, which bees do. And with the bee population being at an all-time low and still declining, why would we keep using neonics in our modern agricultural practices when we've seen that its ban in places like Europe have shown minimal negative economic impact?
We've actually found evidence in the EU that since the 2-year span, since the ban of neonics, that the European Union has lost approximately 1.7 billion euro, which equates to about 2.6 billion Canadian dollars. So they've banned neonics, so how would we compensate Canadian farmers and the Canadian economy if it was to be banned in Canada?
So there's no doubt that banning neonics would decrease the yield and the profits of farmers. They are a huge contributor to yield increases in the bumps that we've seen with crops. But are we willing to make profits at the expense of the health and of the environment and the animals that live in it? At some point, we do need to start taking accountability for our actions, and we need to do what we can to leave as little of an impact on the environment and the bees that we can. Bee populations, they continue to decrease with the widespread use of neonics and pesticides. It's very frightening. Bees are heavily relied on to pollinate the crops. Neonics, they're nerve agents, and which they've been shown to damage bees. They do memory damage, decline queen bee numbers. In some cases, certain neonics have actually increased queen bee numbers, but they've been actually infertile. So how can you justify using neonics knowing it causes this harm to the much needed bee population?
So in parts of your evidence, you explain that the bees pollinate 3/4 of the world's supply that the human race cannot live without. We have evidence to suggest that in the opposite. In fact, a report in 2018 from the Natural Resource Defense Council explained that over 60% of the food we eat today doesn't require pollination, and only 13 foods we eat absolutely require animal pollination. The NRDC further explains that if bees were to become extinct, the human diet may lack variety, but we would not starve.
Again, your evidence has explained that the EU banned neonics in all plants that attract bees and other pollinators, and plan to extend that to all crops in the future. Our research has found studies that have shown in the ban in the EU, oilseed production is in fact down 4%. So how will farmers continue to produce enough food for a population expect to grow to 9 billion people with practices that actually decrease our yield?
When we're talking about like global hunger with the growing population, is it really that good of a trade-off though when bees pollinate 3/4 of the world's crops to the loss of bees, like when let's go on what Canada's doing. This debate has not been overlooked by Canadian authorities as they're looking into solutions of possible alternatives to this particular issue. Ontario and Quebec has already began placing limits on neonic use. In places like Vancouver and Montreal, they have banned them completely. Health Canada has also come to the preliminary conclusion that one type of neonic builds up to toxic levels on water sources, and it should be banned.
The evidence that we found that says neonics that do harm bees was mainly done by experimenting on bees in greenhouses with high doses of neonics that most wild bees would never encounter in their lifetime. In 2014, Health Canada found some bee colonies in the wild were found to have pesticide residual, and in the hives were some, and other colonies did not have any measurable amounts. This makes it difficult to determine if bees are actually affected by the neonics or not.
And last statement.
We have evidence that loss of flower-rich habitat is the biggest factor in declining bee health. So even with a ban of neonics, it can be suggested that bee populations will still decline, and the ban will truly be for nothing. So instead of banning neonics, should we not focus on advocating for preservation of bees' natural habitat?
So neonics, they accumulate in beehives. So when bees, they go out, they collect nectar and pollen, they spread it around. When they come back into the hive and they turn that nectar into honey, small insignificant amounts of neonics kind of accumulate inside the beehives over time. A 2013 study found that when researchers analyzed pollen and nectar from beehives in 7 major crops, they found 35 different pesticides along with high fungicide loads accumulating inside these hives. Each sample contained on average 9 different pesticides.
So can I close that statement?
The population of bee colonies are still being harmed as the use of neonics is still widely used in modern agriculture. The harmful effects of using neonics in our agricultural practices will only grow in severity as this practice is unsustainable. Bee populations are still expected to decrease and will follow by a decline in crop pollination and yield production. As it was seen in Europe, a ban placed on neonics did not drastically reduce crop yields, but a continuously reducing bee population is sure to have a drastic impact on crop yields, considering bees pollinate 3/4 of the world's crops. A world ban on neonics should be put into place so the bee population can regain its former numbers and pollination can increase, thus increasing crop yields in the process.
Given the facts provided in this debate, the answer is obvious that there should not be a ban on neonicotinoids. A ban would ultimately have a negative effect on farmers, consumers, and the economy. As pointed out earlier, there's not enough scientific evidence to relate neonics and the degrading health of bees. There are too many unstudied factors that need to be researched and compared before blaming the decline in bees solely on neonics. Since some of the prosecution's information and facts are from a news article and unreliable sources, it is difficult to know which facts are backed by science and based on someone's opinion. Like many other controversial issues, the media has tried to scare the population into thinking neonics are the main problem without any concrete evidence. A ban to neonics without a safe and reliable alternative for farmers will only hinder agriculture and food production. More research needs to go into creating a better alternative to neonics before any kind of decision is made. For these reasons, we can only see that neonicotinoids are not linked to declining health and number of bee colonies and thus should not be banned in agriculture use.
Good job. Well done.